Hello, Mithril here once again, and it's time for the last batch of Secret of Evermore demos. Today we'll be covering the Call Bead spells. A secondary magic system, Call Beads are a somewhat rare item that you can use to summon aid from one of the 4 leaders of Evermore. Each has their own list of spells, some of more use than others, but here we'll be taking a look at all 16 spells. First up, let's take a look at the Call Bead spells of the ruler of Prehistoria, Elizabeth Ruffleberg. Granddaughter of Professor Sidney Ruffleberg, she was part of the original experiment that stranded the 4 leaders of Evermore in a strange world of their own imaginations. A lover of prehistoric times, Elizabeth ended up as the leader of a land of cavemen and dinosaurs. Due to the way her glasses shine as she uses her fiery alchemy, the locals dubbed her Fire Eyes. Elizabeth has 4 spells at her disposal. Elizabeth's first spell is Flare. This shoots fireballs at enemies, pretty plain and simple. It essentially works like any of the missile-type alchemy formulas, meaning that there is a variable time frame as to how long it'll take projectiles to hit their targets. Speed-wise, it's on par with Hardball for being one of the fastest-moving missile attacks. Power-wise, it falls off a bit. While Flare is stronger than the Flash formula that she teaches you, it's not as powerful as the Fireball formula you get later, and even the rest of her Call Bead spells tend to be more powerful. Overall, this one's mainly good if the speed of attack is the main issue. Heat Wave is another fiery attack spell courtesy of Fire Eyes. This one is one of those rare cases where all enemies on screen will get hit by it, rather than the maximum 3 targets most attack spells can have. Due to the instantaneous nature of this spell, it's impossible to stack casts of it. It on average deals more damage than Flare, and tends to be on par with Storm, another of her spells. The damage it does, however, will be split up amongst all targets, meaning the more enemies that are on screen, the less damage it'll do to any one single target. Still, this one's really good if you're feeling overwhelmed. Storm is Elizabeth's final attack spell. Essentially, it's a weaker version of the Lightning Storm alchemy formula you get later in the game. Like most attack spells, it can target up to 3 enemies at once, though it of course splits the damage. Upon use, targets are halted by storm clouds and then struck by lightning. Power-wise, it's stronger than Flare, so in most cases, Storm should be used instead. The animation and attack is, however, slower, so Flare only really wins out on speed. Life Spark is Fire Eyes' only ally targeting spell. Basically, it's an emergency heal if you don't have any of the more common healing items or access to the heal alchemy formula yet. It restores HP to the target plain and simple. Granted, as rare as Call Beads are, you'll probably raid your stash of petals and nectar or just use the heal formula before you'll want to use this. Definitely emergency only. Next up, we have Horace Highwater, the leader of Antiqua. A friend of the professors and curator of the Podunk Museum of Natural History, Horace found himself as an archaeologist in a land made up of influences from many ancient cultures. Signs of Roman, Greek, and Egyptian history all can be seen in the various areas of Antiqua, and Horace thankfully seems to know his way around it all. He has 5 spells in his list, though there are a couple of oddities. First, he's the only leader that doesn't automatically give you access to his Call Bead spells during forced conversations. You have to make sure to talk to him at his camp enough times for him to bring up the subject, otherwise you're locked out of his spells. Second, 2 of his spells actually have to be found by the player before you can use them. It feels like some sort of mechanic that maybe they were going to do more with, that other leaders would have had hidden spells as well, yet he's the only one to actually have them. Anyway, on to the demos. Horace's first Call Bead spell is Confound. Given you've likely fallen under this status ailment yourself by now, it's pretty clear what this does. Targets hit by Confound will be confused for 60 seconds. Due to their programming, Enemies aren't usually hit that badly by it. They still seem to move more or less normally as opposed to how your controls get reversed. However, they're less likely to approach an attack, and more likely to just attack empty air. Thus, they can still be a threat if you're not careful, just as how if you get used to the reversed controls, you can struggle through Confound yourself. Next up we have First Aid. This one's a bit of an anything you can do, I can do better, at least in comparison to Elizabeth's Life Spark. First Aid once more is just a healing spell, and a bit stronger than Life Spark, restoring a large amount of HP to the target. As such, the same thoughts apply. It's mostly there for if you don't have any healing items, aren't equipped with a healing alchemy formula, and find yourself in an emergency situation. As rare as Call Beads are in general, probably there are better uses. Horace's next spell is kind of a weird one, Time Warp. Basically a cosmic undo button. This spell will always target both the boy and the dog, and essentially it undoes the last hit they each took. Notably, it only cares about HP restoration. It will not cure status ailments. Kind of a weird and unique power, though admittedly probably not the most useful thing, as just more general healing would probably be a better use of your time and power. Next is Regenerate, though this introduces an odd caveat. Horace, for whatever reason, has 2 Call Bead spells that you actually have to find within certain pots or chests to unlock them for use. Why Horace and Horace alone has this issue? Who the heck knows? The pot containing Regenerate is found within the Great Pyramid, and it is actually permanently missable due to the whole your dog has to stand still on switches for you mechanic of that particular area. Also notable, if you haven't spoken to Horace enough for him to tell you about his discoveries on Call Beads and give you access to his normal spells, even if you get to the pot, you won't be allowed to open it. Regenerate itself is essentially the magic version of the pixie dust item. If the target fully runs out of HP, they will be revived with 60 HP, or a little bit more if you have the Moxa Stick item. A handy emergency revival if needed, but since pixie dust is more readily available than Call Beads and does the exact same amount of healing as the spell, that kinda drops the usefulness. Aura is next on the list, and this one too is hidden away within the world. This time the chest you need to open is located in Gothica. It's located south of the Ivor Tower entrance, found in a secret passage through the trees. Notably, from what I've read, you are actually allowed to open this chest, even if you didn't talk to Horace enough to get his other Call Bead spells. But if you didn't, you still won't actually be able to use it even though it says you got the spell. Oversights! Anyway, Aura is essentially the Call Bead equivalent of everyone's favorite broken shield spell, Barrier. For 45 seconds, the target will be protected from almost all damage sources. Main exceptions are pure damage, such as damage taken from poison water, the desert heat, Megatar's ground shake, or Coleoptera's roar. Interestingly though, there are some differences between Aura and Barrier. Barrier does give the benefit of healing your HP a bit in addition to the shield, but Aura can protect you from some damage sources that Barrier cannot. It protects you from the HP drain of the poison and plague status ailments. Third in the lineup is Camellia Bluegarden, the local librarian of Podunk. Seemingly a fan of high fantasy, her region of Evermore is the medieval Knights and Dragons region, Gothica. Within this fantasy realm, she became Queen Bluegarden, ruler of Ebon Keep. An odd bit of trivia regarding official art, Camellia seems to be the only one of the rulers to not have art of how she looks within Evermore itself. Instead, we get this picture, which seems more just casual attire from her days in Podunk. And she has a cat. On a leash. Good luck with that. Anyway, we're here for the spell demos, and Camellia has 4 of them for us to look at. Camelia's first spell is Shockwave. Essentially, this one works like Heatwave, damaging all enemies on screen with an earth-shaking tremor. One of the only 3 attacks in the game that can hit all enemies rather than just a maximum of 3, though the damage output is fairly similar to that of Heatwave anyway. Still, better than Corrosion at least. Next up is Shield. A defensive spell, Shield reduces almost all damage sources, both physical and magical, by half for 60 seconds. Pure damage sources still get through, however. Unfortunately, this is not a very useful spell at all. If you're going to spend a Call Bead for defense, Aura is far and away a better option. Granted, if you forgot to get Horace's abilities, I guess this would be better than nothing. Next on the list we have Hypnotize. This one's actually pretty good. In effect, it's somewhat similar to the Stop Alchemy formula, but far better. It targets all enemies on screen rather than a max of 3, freezes them for a period of time from about 21 to 25 seconds, but does not render them immune to damage. So, you can stop the enemies in their tracks and layer on the attacks. So yeah, this one's actually pretty useful as Call Bead spells go. Finally, for Her Majesty Queen Bluegarden, we have Plague, which, the connotations of the ruler having a spell called Plague in a medieval-type setting, let's not look at that too closely. Anyway, Plague is another spell that basically just inflicts the named status ailment on targets, in this case, Plague, which is basically poison but more so. It deals pure damage to the target every 4.17 seconds, and does not wear off by itself. It either has to be cured, or it lasts until the target runs out of HP. Interestingly, Carltron's robot cannot be damaged by Plague. The final leader of Evermore is Professor Sidney Ruffleberg himself. A brilliant scientist, he created a machine that could transport people from our world into a realm made from their minds and imaginations. Conducting an experiment with his granddaughter and a couple of close friends, they found themselves in Evermore. Just a shame his robot butler Carltron decided to cause problems. Put in a position of having to watch from afar, Sidney keeps an eye on the hero's adventure from his station in Omnitopia, a futuristic base hovering in space above the surface of Evermore. Despite being the one to start it all, Sidney only has 3 spells in his Call Bead list. First, for Professor Ruffleberg, we have Disrupt. This is another case of an older spell upgraded. In this case, it's a better version of Horace's Confound. They have pretty similar icons, so you'd basically expect as much. The main difference is, in addition to the confusion effect, Disrupt also does a moderate amount of damage to targets scaled with a player's level. However, it's likely the least damaging attack spell out of all Call Bead spells, so don't bother using this as your primary means of dealing damage. Next for Sidney is Restore. This one is a full heal for both heroes, making it the best Call Bead healing spell. However, there is a strange quirk to this one. It always fully heals both the boy and the dog, but you can set it to only target one of them. The targeted hero will undergo the healing animation, but both will get the benefits. So for example, you can let one hero go through the spell effect while the other continues to fight. This can actually be pretty handy, as the one going through the animation is also rendered immune to damage during it. Notably, however, it will not revive the dog if he's out of HP, so bear that in mind. Finally, yes, for some reason Sidney only has 3 spells total, we have Electrobolt. This spell creates a ball of electricity over the boy's head, which then zaps targets with lightning. Damage scales with the player's level. Overall, Electrobolt does the most damage out of any of the attack-type Call Bead spells. However, the base power it has isn't that different from Elizabeth's Storm, which we got far earlier. Still, it's fun and satisfying. While those were all the Call Bead spells actually in the game, the official player's guide claims the existence of 2 more spells, one for Camellia and one for Sydney. Camellia supposedly is shown to have a magic drain spell, which would steal MP from the enemy. How this would work in a game that doesn't actually have MP where the player is concerned? Hard to say. But maybe it could at least keep enemies from using their spells? How do they use Alchemy anyway? Sydney's additional spell was dubbed Bullseye, and it was just a buff to the hero's attack power. That one seems like it would have been simple enough to implement at least. Whether the strategy guide was just 100% wrong on these, or whether these actually were originally planned but just scrapped by the game's release, it's hard to say. Notably though, unlike the laser alchemy formula, to my knowledge there isn't any skeletal code remaining in the game that points to either of these 2 spells. So, bit of a mystery, that. So with that, at long last, it's time to finally fully bring Secret of Evermore to a close. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through an old action RPG I enjoyed from my childhood. It may have its flaws like any other game, but it's still a very solid adventure, and one that I had a great time revisiting. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well.